They say networking is all about who you know. And for Tony Gibson, so is recruiting in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Thursday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. Wednesday for NC State football was a double red light day. They picked up two players from the transfer portal, both very much needed at their respective positions. We will start today talking about KJ Martin. He is a safety from Akron by way of West Virginia, and we talked about the networking with Tony Gibson. Tony Gibson actually recruited KJ to West Virginia way back in, I believe, probably 2018 or 2019, and that same relationship proved to be still evident as Tony Gibson reels in KJ now to play with the Wolfpack.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big-time get. And like you said, it's always going to be all about the relationships. And this was an established relationship that Tony Gibson leveraged to the maximum efficiency to get this job done. And I think the most interesting thing about this is safety is a position that you and I both looked at and said, it feels like we're good here, but you can never have too many good players. You can never have too much depth to where, you know, you're looking at a situation where things basically, if anything goes wrong, if anything doesn't work out, you have another good player on the roster that already knows the scheme to some degree because, like you said, he was recruited under Tony Gibson, and Tony Gibson ain't changed that much. Ain't nothing changed but the date on the calendar about Tony Gibson. So I think that this is a really, really good pickup here. Whether he's just a depth piece or whether he plays a ton of snaps is still to be seen. But either way, to have somebody who knows the system coming in, I like it.
KJ Martin was an all-MAC third-team safety last season in 2023 with the Zips. He posted 45 tackles, 16 solo tackles. He had 6 PBUs and was tied for the team lead with 2 interceptions. And, you know, when you are looking at who else we have at the safety position on the roster, I think after hearing all the names I'm about to read, you might understand why KJ Martin would be so necessary. So you have Devin Boykin, who is currently rehabbing a torn ACL. When healthy, he is very obviously the starter. He's been here for 4 years, and he's been a very solid piece in the back half of that secondary. But we don't know how ready he will be once August rolls around. He tore this ACL right before the Pop-Tarts Bowl at the end of December. And I don't know how quickly they're rehabbing torn ACLs these days, but I would have to think that he won't be fully healthy until probably the first couple weeks of September. At least. Because you're looking at 10 months. Even in my brain, that feels way too fast. But it's not the old days rubbing a stick of butter on your knee and calling it good.
Yeah.
But
they're not putting it together with cat guts anymore. They're not doing that.
We certainly hope Boykin can be healthy sooner than later. Then you move further down the depth chart. You're looking at Rente Hinton. He is currently converting to safety. He was a backup corner last year, played behind Shaheem Battle, if I'm not mistaken. Saw very limited action, so this would be quite the jump from corner to safety coming into this year. Then you have Bishop Fitzgerald. He quietly had a really solid year last year at the safety position. He really is the only guy that feels like a lock at safety as of right now. Assuming Boykin will not be a full go for game one, you really feel good about Bishop Fitzgerald. And so then when you look at the other players listed at the safety position, you have Damon Fagan, freshman, Zach Myers, redshirt freshman, Brody Barnhart, true freshman, and Jacoby Baldwin, who is, I believe Jacoby Baldwin is a junior, but he's a converted wide receiver. So he is also new to the safety position. So seeing these guys that are converting to safety, that tells you exactly what the coaching staff has been thinking. They need a lot more depth at the safety position. So now when you roll back and you look at this commitment for KJ Martin, and assuming Boykin won't be a full go, KJ Martin could very well see a good deal of snaps once the season gets going.
And I think, those are all the guys that are on campus, but we have an absolute stud, a guy that I am anybody who's heard me talk about him, I have, again, the more I watch this kid, the more I watch him, the more I'm like, oh, Alabama and Auburn are going to regret letting him leave the state. And Ronnie Royal III, that young man is different. He is different, but even to be different, he's still a true freshman. So I get what you're saying, and I 1,000% agree in terms of, you don't want to be in a position where you're counting on freshmen to translate and to figure it out quickly, especially a freshman that's coming on campus during fall camp. Like, it's not a most ideal situation, even if it is somebody that, again, I think is supremely talented. I think that kid is so good. I'd be surprised if he didn't put up some Earl Wolfish type numbers when it's all said and done. And for those of you who remember Earl Wolf, you remember exactly how good he was. But I think that Ronnie Royal's got that with a little bit higher of an upside in terms of coverage. He's just not as big as Earl was, or not as tall as Earl was. But that kid's special. But I do understand the thought of, even if you're counting on him to be special, you still don't want to be in a situation where it's, you have nobody here. So you're absolutely right. He could play a lot of snaps. This could be a situation where he ends up potentially, the way that you laid this thing out, potentially being the starter. Who knows?
Yeah, Ronnie Royal is absolutely going to be a main fixation in that back half of the secondary eventually. But having to rely on 4 or 5 guys that are either a true freshman, a redshirt freshman, or brand new to the safety position, I don't know how comfortable you can really feel about that with the season that we're looking to have. And so that's why the addition of KJ Martin is so important at this point of the spring. And so bringing in a guy that Tony Gibson is obviously familiar with, and something I've really noticed a lot of times when we get defensive commitments, or sometimes it's a flip commitment, that one of the first things I hear about is the player usually states the relationship between him and Coach Gibson remained constant. And I think NC State staff has done a fantastic job at staying in touch with prospects they really have their eye on, despite them committing elsewhere or they're looking elsewhere. But you stay consistent. And then over time, that relationship will pay you back. And then they land here at NC State, and then they make a difference on the field. This is not quite the same situation, but that relationship still pops up again, and it turns out to be another win for Tony Gibson. So KJ Martin, safety from Akron and also West Virginia, committed to NC State, could very well see a lot of meaningful snaps at the very beginning of the season. Who knows? He might pan out to just be a very solid piece back there for the whole season. But nonetheless, this was much needed and very important to add him to the roster here. Coming up next, we're getting into our second portal edition of Wednesday, a defensive lineman who, again, fills another really big need for this squad. After a quick word from our sponsors. Our first sponsor of the day is Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? What if I told you with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and then access the expert analysis that you need to tend to your entire portfolio? For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all of the tools and data in just one simple place. They are the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. You can securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's also how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. That's yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Middle portion of our Thursday show, now getting into our second transfer portal commitment that occurred on Wednesday. Defensive lineman from Colorado, Chaz Wallace, has also decided to run with the pack. And yet again, another extremely important addition to this team, and he will slot in very nicely behind Brandon Cleveland.
I'm starting to think that Coach Doran is about getting a little get back. Starting to think that he's one of those guys like, you take one of mine, I'm going to take two of yours, because it's getting interesting. You know, first the MJ Moore situation in Maryland, and we get two of their corners, and then you look at Timmons going to Colorado, and you get one of their defensive linemen, one of their better defensive linemen from last year, actually, especially in terms of interior defensive line, where things didn't really go too well for most folks over there. This is interesting. This is very interesting. I think very highly of Chaz, but I think the biggest thing that he adds another piece up front, because you don't want to be in a situation where if Brandon Cleveland gets hurt, who do you have? Right. Who's your next guy? Who's your next man up? And I think that he can push. I think he can push Brandon Cleveland in terms of when you know that you have a competent backup behind you. Not only do you get rest, you also have to play harder, because if you're slacking off, if you're not doing what you got to do, those seats, back when I played, you sat in the defensive line room based on the depth chart. Those seats could easily switch around. You could easily go from the first seat to the second seat because the guy behind you is performing well, and you're going through a little bit of a tough time. So, you know, it's always good. Iron sharpens iron. You can never have too many good players. I don't care how many times I say it. I'll say it a million more. You can never have too many good players, and Chaz surely is one of those.
In terms of adding pieces to this team, I think defensive lineman was probably my second biggest concern. And so to get this filled, it's honestly like a sigh of relief. And Correct. Like Kenton just illustrated there, you can't have the situation where Brandon Cleveland's basically riding solo. If he goes down, that's like a doomsday scenario for your defensive line. So to bring in a quality piece like Chaz Wallace, even if it is, you know, basically for just depth purposes only, he's talented enough that you can feel comfortable with him in the game at multiple points, and he's talented enough to keep Cleveland motivated. Like you mentioned, the fear of losing your job is more than enough to keep a guy going. So does he have crazy numbers? No, but if you look at the tape, you see that he's capable of putting those up. And so to bring him in behind Brandon Cleveland, and I'm sure at this point Brandon Cleveland knows he is the guy at nose tackle, pun intended. You still have to keep a guy back there to keep him motivated. You can't be complacent at this type of situation. So this is another really big addition. It fills another need. I certainly hope they look now at linebacking core, because I think they could use another piece or two there in the portal. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, after the additions of KJ Martin and now Chaz Wallace, I think we're down to just 2 scholarship spots now available. So with this being said, Kenton, where does the priorities really need to be shifted to at this point now?
Backer.
Just said it.
We need a linebacker, a game changer at the linebacker position. You know, the young man from Auburn, I thought very highly of him. And I still do. Even though he's not going to be playing for the Pack, I think he'll be fine wherever he goes. But that young man was dynamic. And I thought you add his talent in with Tony Gibson, he's going to be phenomenal. But, you know, it didn't materialize here. I want to see us get another player, not necessarily of his caliber, but as close as you can get. As close as you can get, you know, to who that young man was. You're going to be looking at a good situation there. But more importantly, I struggle with talking about how disappointing the linebacker play was last year, or not last year, in the spring game, rather. I struggle to kind of quantify how rough it was the more you watch the tape. And so with that in mind, we need guys at that position. Again, I think if we get a guy or two at that position that can really get it done, we'll be good there. And offensive line is another spot where, you know, if you use one, get you a good level linebacker, get you some depth on the offensive line as well, because quiet's kept. We're in a similar situation to where we are with Brandon Cleveland in terms of if one or two of these guys go down, we're stuck sitting here like, oh, man, we got to get a guy playing a lot of snaps that's never played meaningful college football in his life. So, you know, those are probably the 2 places I'd look.
The portion of our Tuesday show that got cut off, we had also discussed Jihad Carter from Syracuse and Ohio State had been visiting NC State. I don't know how likely that might be now that you get the commitment from KJ Martin, who's also a safety. But nonetheless, it's been a really good week for interest in NC State. Getting multiple guys on campus for visits here as you're really desperately trying to close out your roster, it's important because the urgency is there on both sides. And so for NC State, who I presume will now be looking for a linebacker and then probably another lineman, really on either side of the ball,
Right.
the intensity is still turned up there. You're still sort of on the clock to get this roster finalized before you can feel comfortable going into the summer, and then you strap it up and get ready to go once fall camp rolls around. So Chaz Wallace is the second addition that was announced on Wednesday. Again, fills a really, really crucial need to slot in there behind Brandon Cleveland at nose tackle. He's talented enough to play a decent amount. I'm sure he'll probably see quite a bit of snaps. We can't wait to see what he does in the red and white.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about that. And I think the other thing that we need to acknowledge here is the potential and possibility of Coach Gibson not abandoning the 3-3-5, but maybe shifting a little bit more to run more 4-2-5. Because if you lack a lot of linebacker talent and depth, but you know that your cornerback room or your safety room can get it done, or your defensive line is that good, you could potentially say, you know what? We're going to slide some of our linebackers down. You're going to be attached to the line of scrimmage more, but we'll still have a lot of 3-3-5 principles where we can easily shift out of this and drop you back and all that type of stuff. So, I think it'll be very interesting to see, but I think that adding these two pieces gives you a little bit more versatility and scheme versatility. And definitely, again, you can never have too many good players.
This might be a tough question to answer at this point, but if you had to slide a linebacker down, who would you slide?
Man, that's a really, really great question. I want to see the young man for Tennessee get on campus because I think when I watch him play, he seems very – yes, I'd like to see Groves on campus because he looks very instinctive and he looks like he could be really good at the linebacker position, but he also – and maybe it's just the game film and how slow the other kids that played against him were looking. It also looks like he lacks a little bit of that short area explosion right now, top end speed type of deal. So I'd love to see, what he looks like and kind of getting him in those situations because right now I think Sean Brown is a much better fit on the second level where he can roam and be a, not Peyton Wilson guy, but a guy that can roam sideline to sideline and do his thing. Obviously, Betty and Fordham, I don't want either one of those guys on the line of scrimmage. I think they're much better covered up as well, but I'd love to see Groves and what he can do. And he has the frame for it as well. That's the other big thing. He has the frame that I'm like, if you can put on, if he's put on 10, 15 pounds of good weight, I can see it.
Coming up next, we're talking about some potential disrespect in some preseason polls, whether you care or maybe don't care about them, after a quick word from our sponsors. Our second sponsor of the day is FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home big wins of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. You heard me correctly. $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Hopefully they all count for the Hurricanes coming back home in Game 3 against the Rangers. If you want to put a little something extra on it, get on over to FanDuel. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Rounding out our Thursday show, now had to call into attention a post-spring college football preseason poll produced by Joel Klatt of Fox Network. I'm going to bring up this poll, and for those that are watching, you'll instantly see what I'm talking about. For those that are listening, I'll tell you about it in just a couple seconds, but here it is. This is Joel Klatt's post-spring college football top 25. First thing you instantly notice, NC State is not on it. Now, Kenton probably has a couple things to say about the other teams that are on it, but a lack of NC State post-spring is shocking to me. Now, I'm not expecting NC State to be like a top 10 team at this point. I don't see that quite yet. However, I would slot them anywhere from like 19 to 23. The way that they ended last season, all the work they did in the transfer portal, and the anticipation for this coming season with the schedule that they have, I don't think there's any way you can keep them outside of a preseason top 25. And again, me personally, I'm not even one that's that big on preseason top 25s. A lot of times, I think it's just clickbait. You really don't have a good gauge on this type of thing, I think, until like week 3 sometimes. So preseason top 25s are kind of wishy-washy as is, but to not have NC State in here, I think is shocking. The matchup that we're going to have with Tennessee in week 2, regardless on who you ask, that is a ranked matchup. Any way you look at it, any way you cut it and slice it, that's a ranked matchup. And
whoever wins that game is going to walk out ranked. You're absolutely right.
Well, yeah. I guess if NC State doesn't start in there, yes, they will absolutely be ranked after that. But that's probably going to be one of the top matchups in all of week 2. And a lot of times slapping a number on both of those teams is what brings in a lot more eyes to that game. It is important from an aspect of even recruiting. We've talked a lot about national perception of teams and the way that helps with recruiting and national brand. I've really kind of turned a corner on that because I didn't really used to pay attention to all of that as much as I do now. But that type of thing matters. And so I think Klatt is definitely selling NC State short here with his post-spring top 25.
Good. Let him sleep. Let him take the NyQuil. Let him take the ZQuil. Let him take the Ambien. Let him take whatever he needs to take to stay asleep. But I do want to point something out to fans. There is a team on this list that against fellow Power 5 teams last year had a point differential of negative 32.
Woo.
The mighty Iowa Hawkeyes had a point differential of negative 32. And here we are sitting behind that team that, again, they may have had the most fraudulent 10-win season of a Power 5 team I've ever seen in my life. In my life. First of all, let's talk about the fact that this is what they did against other ranked teams last year. They only played 2 ranked teams all of last year. Those 2 teams were Penn State and Michigan. Do you know – 3 ranked teams, Penn State, Michigan, and Tennessee. Do you know what the combined score of those games were?
I don't even know if Iowa scored a point.
No, they didn't. But take a wild guess as to what those 3 games – take a wild guess as to what the combined score in those games were.
I know they got waxed by Tennessee, and I know they got waxed by Michigan. I think they got waxed by Penn State. I'm gonna say somewhere around the neighborhood of like 75-0.
94-0.
Oh wow, I sold that way short.
94 94-0, and y'all are like, this is a ranked team. Well, okay, maybe. Hey, Ken, you're being unfair. Let's talk about their wins against Power 5 teams. Sure, let's do it. Probably the most underwhelming team out of all the Power 5 last year, Iowa State and their Cyhawk series, 20-13. Okay, good win there. Michigan State, who had just lost their coach, 26-16. Good win there. Purdue, who also was working with a brand new head coach, 20-14. Wisconsin. I'm going to leave that where it sits. 15-6. Northwestern, who also had a new coach after their coach got fired because of an investigation into some, let's say, adult subject matters that were going down in that locker room. Do you know what the score to that game was? 10-7.
Oh, PU.
The most quality win that I'd say they have is against the Fighting Greg Schianos of Rutgers, 22-0. Other than that, senior day win against Illinois, 15-13. A win against Nebraska, 13-10 is their next win. That is the most fraudulent 10-win team I have ever heard of. And every time they went up against a real ranked team, they got spanked. They got put to sleep. They got taken out like it was nobody's business. They got taken out like yesterday's trash. So when you look at these top 25 preseason, way too early, post-spring, pre-portal, post-portal, I took the bait for you. Don't also take the bait. Because when you find yourself looking up statistics about Iowa's offense, you've taken the bait. And I took the bait for you so you don't have to do it. Get this nonsense out of here, Grayson.
There's another team I'd actually like to eat the trash on. It's Clemson at 13.
Oh, yeah.
I think you could sell me at Clemson from anywhere from 22 to 25. But 13? Where are you getting Clemson at 13 from? They too went on a win streak to finish their season. They lost a lot of key pieces, and guess how many they brought in? 0. They do not believe in the transfer portal. So I don't know how you can convince me that that team is that much better going into this season. I have no earthly idea how you have them at 13. And so, again, seeing Clemson that high and seeing teams like both Nebraska and Iowa in here, but no NC State, that's fine. Sometimes we like it better that way. We want to be slept on. Kenton was listing off all the prescriptions that Joel Klatt may be on to be sleeping on NC State this hard. That's all fine and good. Once we lace them up in August, we'll make enough noise that we'll be in there before long. That'll do it for us here on Thursday, getting back on our regular schedule. Thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments in the comment box. Tell us how you feel about KJ Martin committing to the Pack to play safety this coming season, and also about defensive lineman Chaz Wallace completing the Terrell Timmons trade with Colorado. Any other thoughts you have in the comment box, throw them down there. Tell us how you think NC State is being crazy slept on in Joel Klatt's post-spring top 25. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out the door. We are now less than 35 away from 2K. It's getting close. We can smell it. Thank you all so very much for the support. We will see you all tomorrow on Friday. And until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.